So this was a little closer than I'd like. I didn't see the aircraft coming from the opposite direction, and today I'll break down what went wrong. Hello there. In this decision-making debrief, we're going to take a close look at a recent sightseeing flight I did around the Pembrokeshire coastline. That coastline was so beautiful and mesmerising that I neglected my lookout for other traffic. So here's the story. I was flying from Sleip in Shropshire to Haverfordwest in Pembrokeshire and decided to take the scenic route. The Pembrokeshire coastline has to be amongst the most scenic there is in the UK, with its coves, caves and castles. And on this particular day the sun was shining and it was cav-OK. Spotting other traffic would be easy, or so I thought. I'd been under a basic service from Aberporth radar. I should have perhaps asked for a traffic service, but the frequency was quiet and the visibility excellent. They'd been passing me traffic information, which they didn't have to, under a basic service, but I was quite happy with that.
Just keep a good look out as you track towards, of course, there was a Jodel DR10 tracking south from Barmouth along the coast, last reported at 2,000 feet.
Roger, we'll look for that traffic. Go ahead, Victor.
I was enjoying flying around the twists and turns in the coastline and soaking up the view.
The colours of the sea are really nice. I mean, they're not quite Caribbean, but for the UK, quite nice.
I soon reached the limit of Aberporth radar's radio range, and so they had to let me go.
India Victor, expect we'll lose two-way communication shortly. Nothing further for you. Squawk conspicuity.
Squawk conspicuity, thanks for your help. Golf India Victor.
Aberporth suggested switching to Haverfordwest, my destination airfield, but I was at least 20 minutes from landing there, and since they're an air-ground station only, I figured that the information they could pass would be very limited. Without any radar services in this area, I chose to stay non-radio. So some errors of judgment there on my part, I think, on reflection. I didn't get a traffic service when I was talking to Aberporth radar when one was available, and then when out of their range I didn't get a service from Haverfordwest. I was kind of thinking, well, I'm not going to get anything useful from them, I'm 20 minutes out. But actually, do you know what? Had I been talking to them, there is a reasonable chance, since they're the kind of unit for that area, that they may have been able to give me some information about other aircraft in the vicinity. Then just 3 minutes after leaving Aberporth radar, this happened.
We're at St David's Head now. Got a busy beach down there.
I'm looking at the beach to my left and neglecting my lookout scan.
People, lots of people out in the sea. Oh, aircraft, opposite direction.
A Cessna 172 passed underneath me, opposite direction, about 500 feet below. There was no risk of a collision, and there was enough distance between us for me to judge it was not a reportable air prox, but it was still concerning to me that I hadn't spotted the aircraft sooner. I accept that my lookout was degraded, but actually I think it would have been hard to have seen this aircraft even if I had been looking out properly. Actually, our closing speeds would have been something near 200 knots. We were head on to each other. It was also a fair bit lower than me, and the limits of our eyesight would dictate that it probably was below my engine cowling by the time it was visible to the naked eye. It also seemed to be disguised by the shimmering sea. But what concerns me most is I was clearly letting my lookout suffer because I was enjoying the view. I was also lulled into a full sense of security by the perfect weather, the quiet frequency, an area of the country that isn't typically that busy with traffic compared to southern England where I normally fly, and maybe I was placing an over-reliance on electronic conspicuity. As it turned out, there was no traffic showing on my display until 5 seconds before we passed each other, and that was a weak Mode S transponder warning only, with no accompanying audible alert. I don't know about you, but I sometimes find on a flight that I'm midway through and I suddenly become conscious that I haven't been looking out properly. And then, of course, I'm sort of jumped into looking out. And I wondered, what can we do to keep that lookout going and effective throughout a whole flight? Be interested in your tips on this, but I did ask one of the instructors at the Astral Aviation Consulting team if they had any tips on how to deal with this. And they did have some really good advice, actually. One thing they said was that if you're going to consciously look away and do something else, let's say, for example, you need to reroute, you need to look at SkyDemon or your other EFB and look at your charts and things, they recommend verbalizing that you're about to do this. In other words, say something like, right, I'm going to stop the lookout to briefly look at my charts. And they think that by verbalizing it, especially if there are other people in the cockpit, you're announcing that the lookout's stopping briefly, but it also is another conscious reminder that you've got to restart it again. And I think that's a really good tip, and it's something I've been trying to do on recent flights. Another thing, of course, that we're always told to do is to chunk things up into little segments. So if we're going to change the radio, we need to look up the frequency so we can look away. We might verbalize that we're going to do that. We look at our EFB or our frequency list, we find it, we put our finger on it, we look up and we do another lookout, attitude, and so on. And then we're back to changing the frequency on our radio, and then we're back on our lookout again. So chunking things up is obviously a good tip. Another thing I think that's worth recognizing is that keeping an effective lookout going, I mean, let's think about it. You've got to sort of look at the wingtip there, you've got to look up and down, and you've got to pause and do all of this. It's quite physically and mentally demanding, especially on long flights. And so once again, it probably is worth thinking about, if you've got some long distances to travel, maybe cutting that flight down into 2 or 3 separate legs so you can land, have a cup of tea, have a rest, and then of course you're refreshed to sort of take on the next flight and keep the lookout going effectively again.
There's a really good Safety Sense leaflet from the UK CAA, Safety Sense leaflet 13, Collision Avoidance, which gives some good information and more tips to help you develop an effective lookout. So this was a little too close for my liking, and a reminder that I really must keep that lookout going, obtain the best air traffic service I can, and not assume that if the frequency is quiet or the traffic display empty, there isn't other aircraft lurking nearby. Astral Aviation Consulting runs free general aviation workshops to help pilots keep themselves safe in the sky. The next of those is on Zoom on the 27th of November at 7:30 in the evening, British time. You'll need to register for the session at astralaviationconsulting.com. I'll be back next month with another in this series, so please subscribe to the channel so as not to miss out.